Uh, uh. Good morning. Good morning.
What's up, everyone? It's the Morning Deuce with David Spindle. I'm back. Sorry, missed an episode. Been a little bit of a weird week. Going to get a little bit deep today, so if you're not into that for your morning, I understand. I'm going to give a couple recommendations for some things for people to check out. And the first is another podcast, which is weird that I'm telling you to listen to another podcast, but the second episode came out recently of Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History. And the third is actually coming out on Thursday, his third episode. And each one kind of takes a look at an event or something that happens and examines why it happened or if it was right or what it means. Takes another look at it that other people haven't really looked at. It's brilliant. And the most recent one was a study done on the war in Vietnam, and basically it was about whether or not the United States was making progress and if they could win the war. And basically 3 different people looked at the same data. They all had different conclusions. And basically what Gladwell is saying from that is that it's impossible to evaluate something without a bias. I mean, for data that's not numerical, basically, it's impossible to interpret it without a bias of who you are and what experiences you've been through and what results you want. And he talks a ton about, perspective. And that was kind of a big thing for me is the perspective, the way you choose to look at the events that have happened in your life and the way those shape whatever event you're looking at. So it's definitely worth checking out, and it makes you think about certain situations and certain opinions you have and maybe why you feel the way you do if you're looking for a result because of what you want to happen or what has already happened to you. It's very interesting. If you can reflect it on yourself, it's really interesting. The story is very good. All the podcasts are great so far. The first 2 have been great, and I am sure that I'm going to like the third one because it's about basketball, and sort of the concept is that Wilt Chamberlain shot underhand free throws, and they worked really well, and basically he got made fun of. And so he decided to shoot regular free throws, even though they were significantly worse. And it was worse for his basketball career, but he couldn't take the thought of being made fun of. And it has a lot to do with that whole thought, that whole choice. So I'm excited for episode 3. I thought episode 2 was amazing. So you should check that out and think about a little bit about perspective and the biases that you might have on people or events or whatever in your life. And the second thing that I want you to check out, if you get a chance, is Bo Burnham's new stand-up comedy special on Netflix, which is called Make Happy. And I think these 2 things connect. First off, Bo Burnham is absolutely brilliant and phenomenal, in my opinion, because that's my perspective, which is probably biased. And I know it is because he grew up in suburban Massachusetts, which I didn't even know till after I liked him. And his mom was a hospice nurse, which was also what my mom was. So you want to talk about, I think he's brilliant. I think we have very much similarities in the way that we grew up. We're almost the same age. Obviously, family similarities, location. That I think our perspectives are a little similar, which is probably why I enjoyed him so much. And then once I found that out, I enjoyed him even more. He's different than your normal stand-up comedian because it's almost a performance, like a comedy performance. It's a theatrical, very well executed and brilliantly put together comedy performance. It's not like Louis C.K. or like a Norm Macdonald show where they just kind of go off on whatever they're thinking. He has put together 1 hour of entertainment that is a very brilliant combination of theatrical expression, humor, and things at a much deeper conscious level. So I absolutely recommend that you check it out. But the reason these two things run together, not just because they're available at the same time, but because I've heard a podcast with Burnham before, and I've listened to him talk. Once I realized, I enjoyed him, looked him up, and found out we were similar, I wanted to get a perspective of what he was like when he's not in this performing situation. And he seems like a very deep, interesting guy from the couple podcasts I've listened to, but he has a sort of rare belief, I guess, which wasn't really something I had contemplated before I heard him talk about it. But he doesn't believe in free will, which is sort of a crazy concept. But basically, his concept in terms of free will is that he thinks that everything that's going on in your life is a product of your genetic makeup and the experiences that you've had. And because your genetic makeup doesn't change, your genetic makeup when you're born sets off whatever events you have in your life, whatever first decision you make or whatever first experience you have, then continues to shape what you're doing. And so basically his idea is that anyone put in a decision-making experience with the same genetic makeup and the same past experiences would make the same choice. Therefore, at any point in your timeline, future, past, or present, you would always make the same choices because you are in a situation where you have your genetic makeup and everything that's happened before that moment has shaped what's going to happen in the next moment. And because those aren't changing, because they are based on your experiences before them and your genetic makeup before that, you never really have your own free choice. It's sort of predestined. And I think that fits with bias and perspective a little bit because those talk about how the results you want based on maybe the experiences you've already had gives you a certain mind frame of how you're looking at things. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. We talked I think it's been over a week now, about Elon Musk, the Tesla and SpaceX founder, about his theory that basically the chance that this is an original reality is 1 in billions because of the ability for virtual reality to grow so quickly that new worlds could be created. So if you think about that concept, it fits really well with the lack of free will because if you were a creative player in someone else's video game, you would be created with certain attributes, aka a genetic makeup, and then your character would grow throughout the game based on the experience points that you earn, which would then change your abilities within the game only in a certain manner based on whatever you achieved and whatever points you started with. So I think those concepts might not cancel each other out. If anything, they might sort of harmonize all three of those concepts. The way that everyone looks at information differently based on their bias and perspective. The way that maybe decision-making is something that you aren't really as in control of as you like to think. It's just a process that you're part of. And the idea that maybe the world that we're living in isn't exactly the original one. As deep as those concepts are, I don't necessarily think they all cancel each other out. The interesting thing is if you sort of eliminate your thought about free will and you just sort of understand that your decisions are a result of the experiences that you have, if you choose to look at things this way, if your decisions are a result of the experiences you have and the genetic makeup that you are, then you don't really need to judge yourself. And that's a huge problem we as a culture have, is we are constantly judging ourselves and making ourselves feel bad, playing judge and jury, or we're playing the victim feeling bad about the experiences we're having, the environments, the thoughts and actions of others. Those are making us feel bad. So we either feel bad for ourselves or we're frustrated with ourselves. We spend a lot of time, most people do, at least in one of those two states, either sort of frustrated with actions or thoughts that they're having, or feeling bad about things that are happening to them. But that's because we think we could be putting ourselves in different scenarios. Well, if you sort of eliminate that and take the scenarios as predestined, you eliminate the need to judge yourself or to victimize yourself, and you sort of just evaluate where you are and then try to make the best decision on the next one, and you sort of have a lot of different free headspace. I thought about it for a while, just like trying to let go of not necessarily not think about the decision that I'm making, but just understand that the decision is just the decision. It's the product of everything I am, and it's just going to be what it's going to be, and then I just evaluate where I am and try to make the best one at the next step. You sort of have a interesting, not necessarily, I don't know how to describe it, but you're sort of not holding yourself to this really uncomfortable standard of reaction to everything that goes on in your life. Instead, you're kind of just pragmatically evaluating and then trying to just do what makes you happy. And maybe that's why Bo Burnham's stand-up is called Make Happy. It's a very interesting thing. I know that's a very deep concept for your morning, but maybe whether you agree with the free will or not, or whether you choose to go into the virtual reality theories or not, either way, the idea of everyone having a bias and a perspective and maybe an outcome they want based on what they want in the future, what they've had in the past, and then the idea that maybe judging every decision to make ourselves feel good or bad or victimized or disappointed or any of those emotions might be a waste of our head and our energy space. And just acknowledge that we come into every decision with thousands and thousands and thousands of hours and information that our brain body has retained, that's just the best we can do in that decision, and then try to learn and go on to the next one. And instead of just hanging on that one decision, you give your brain a little bit more free space. And there's a lot you can do with that, especially if it's just observe and try to, empathize with others. You can probably learn more from your environment and then maybe even make better decisions. So that's just an idea for the day. Kind of different, but maybe try to think a little bit less about evaluating our decisions and a little bit more about evaluating our current now, what's going on around us. So check out Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, and Bo Burnham's stand-up special, Make Happy, if that's something you're into, if any of this is something you're into. He doesn't really talk about free will in the comedy special. It's definitely got some deep parts to it, but it's also very funny, and it can be appreciated if you choose not to go as deep as I just did. So there's your fair warning. Switching to part 2 today. Part 2 is a little different and a little the same. It's the same in that it sort of has something that Burnham mentions in his stand-up special, which is sort of monetizing people's need to have their thoughts and feelings appreciated with social media, like the way we found out how to make money off everyone expressing their thoughts and feelings. But it also goes on to something I've talked about before, about taking a social cause and figuring out how to mask it in something, but realize it's just a moneymaker. So the example I used before was the America cans, which have come out this summer for Bud Light, with the stars and stripes that say America on them. And they've sort of picked up on this nationalism and make America great again. And, the 4th of July is coming up. But the reality is it's not even an American-based company anymore. It's Brazilian and Belgium owned. And the reason they do that, a huge chunk of it, is so they can keep tax money overseas so they don't have to pay back as much taxes to the American government, which doesn't pay into any of the things that our federal government is trying to do. It's actually fairly anti-American. but it sort of masked itself in this like social justice. Look at this can that I have. And this sort of hypocrisy idea of monetizing something on the surface because people aren't willing to look deeper. A lot of the times we just want to be told how to feel or just agree with someone that we generally have agreed with in the past. And a really great example of that came up with the whole Brexit, Britain leaving the EU. There was an interview done by a local station, a local news station, like I think it was 2 days before the vote for Britain to leave or stay in the EU. And I think they surveyed 20 Americans and not a single one of them knew what the Brexit was or what that voting process entailed or anything. And yet, the moment it happens, everyone I've talked to has an opinion about whether it's good or bad. A pretty aggressive one, it seems like. But I'm not really sure it's informed. I think that a lot of those opinions are just based on the reaction of one person that they maybe trust, or a headline or a couple headlines, or just the immediate reaction to the economy, or maybe the immediate reaction to certain people across Europe. But obviously, a lot of people across Europe were all about it because it was voted to leave. So people within Britain, that's what they wanted. I think I'm just saying we should probably look for a deeper answer to some of those things. Because sometimes if we just look on the surface level, say like, oh, this one person that I respect, they think this because of one or two facts they told me, so I just think that way too. It sort of went from something that no one knew what it was to everyone is an expert on and has an opinion. And I'm not sure it's that way. I think if you dig a little deeper, maybe there's more opinions or more well thought of opinions to sort of to understand. It's sort of like the Bud Light beer can. If you just look at it on the surface, it might be saying something different than everything underneath. Yeah, and I'm not necessarily pushing one way or the other. I'm just pushing an informed opinion, to not sort of get suckered into the social explosion of it all. And another example came to me because I have an American flag sweatshirt, which I bought for $8.50 or $9 on a clearance rack because I thought it was hilarious. And I bought the sweatshirt, and 4th of July is coming up, one of the times I can socially acceptably wear the sweatshirt. And I had it at work. I had it in my car, and I took it out and threw it on at the end of my shift at work. And the irony of the sweatshirt, which is covered in American flags and stars, obviously to sell based on its sort of Americanness and patriotism, and whether ironically or real in the way that you wear it. The interesting thing about it all is when you look at the sweatshirt, if you take a couple seconds to look, which I hadn't despite owning it for about 6 months, it says on it very firmly, made in Pakistan, which I thought is just sort of hilarious in that if you just look at the sweatshirt and take it from the outside, you think of it as something that represents, pro-America. But it probably was made in an environment that wasn't very good in terms of clothing creation. Judging by the fact that I bought it for $8.50 at a clearance rack, I can only imagine the price the person who was part of creating it was paid. So there's a certain hypocrisy there too, depending on how you're choosing to wear the clothing or why you're choosing to wear it. And I think sometimes we all have a voice on social media. We're so interested in blasting out who we are and what we think, and this is sort of a Bo Burnham spin-off from what he said. We're so interested in sharing what we are and what we think and what we want to be that we're not really willing to scrape down below the surface of anyone else who's sharing their information or sometimes our own. It's like, the whole buy local sticker on a foreign car, and you're just thinking okay, is this person doing what I think they're doing? Do they understand this whole thing? Is this just for one moment? Like, how deeply are we invested in what we believe in, or are we just doing it for the likes sometimes? So yeah, it's kind of been a deep episode. There's a lot to think about. But that's it for the Morning Deuce. You all have a good morning, and we will chat again tomorrow. Deuces. #trending.com.